Fernando Smith, fight Andre Walker at Badbeat 15, the Commerce Casino, April 10th. Well, I've always been a fan, ever since I was a kid, ever since UFC #1. I used to be part of the military. I served our country proudly. I used to be in the Air Force right out of high school. I was a security forces member. Right after that, I relocated to Los Angeles, originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went ahead and I re-enlisted back in the Army. I was a cannon crew member, part of the Field Artillery Division. I was supposed to be deployed to Iraq back in 2005. About 72 hours out from deployment, I got hurt in my training exercises out in the field, and where I blew my shoulder out, torn rotator cuff, superior posterior labrums, the whole nine. I had surgery. I was pretty jacked up, and after surgery and everything else, recovery, I was out for about a year and a half or so. At the time, simultaneously, it's like the world had just kind of come crashing down. I guess it was like a gift and a curse. I was all gung-ho, wanted to go serve with my fellow brothers and sisters out on the front line. But at the same time, simultaneously, I received full custody of both my sons from my ex-wife. So I was married at a young age, wanted to do the right thing, the whole condition. In high school, I had a high school sweetheart, got her knocked up, wanted to do the right thing, go into the service, didn't work out. Went ahead and, like I said, I received full custody of both my sons around the same time that I incurred my injury. So that, on top of the injury, getting custody of my boys, that pretty much just, prevented me and impeded my deployment altogether. And then ended up getting out medically and the whole nine. And just for about a year and a half, I kind of, I just was depressed, painkillers, going through the rehab and the physical therapy, not knowing what I'm going to do. I was going to college at the same time, I had to drop out of school. I was also playing football. I was attending Santa Monica College. I was a walk-on, starting middle linebacker, was being scouted by a few, big D1 universities or whatnot. But just with all that happening to me, I'm just depressed and not knowing what's going to happen, what am I going to do. And I started, doing the whole nightclub bouncer security thing and doing executive protection, bodyguard type stuff, and just meeting some of the guys who were in the same field, surprisingly, were cage fighters or kickboxers. And at that time, prior to 2009, MMA wasn't sanctioned in the state of California, so it was illegal. So it was a lot of underground cage fights, a lot of smokers, and in which I participated in quite a few of them since 2006, 2007, when I first started fighting. A lot of the guys, my fellow bouncers, they were like, hey, Fernando, you're kind of a big guy, you ever thought about fighting? And I'm like, you crazy. I had no, I was always a fan, I just never thought about it. Didn't have too much of a martial arts background. Again, I played football, all throughout school and academic career and, junior college or whatnot. I went ahead and was invited to a few gyms. I participated in some of the tryouts and whatever, and I kicked everybody's ass just in size and strength alone. At that time, I was about a good 250, 255. But during my time of recovery and rehab from the shoulder injury, like I said, from depression and painkillers, and I turned into a horror, just sitting there with a sling and the sutures in my shoulder or whatever. I ballooned like well over 300 pounds. I was kind of fluffy. But like I said, started working out. Got invited to a couple of the gyms, participated in some of their practices and trials. Was kicking ass, and then they had put me up against, I think he was like a brown belt or a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I've always been a fan since Royce Gracie, UFC 1, the smaller guy going against the bigger guy and just kind of neutralizing that. And I was kicking his ass, and I thought strength and size was all there was, to fighting or whatever have you, and didn't mean anything. I ended up gassing out, didn't have much of a gas tank, and he was all of, I'm about 6'1", and at the time I'm like 250, 255, and he's all about like 5'7", 5'8", I call it 5 foot nothing, and maybe about 160, 170 pounds soaking wet, but just freakishly strong. He did and reversed me and had me twisted up like a pretzel, arm bar, neck crank, all types of a bunch of different going on. And it just humbled me, and I just wanted to learn ever since, and that's pretty much how I got into it. I just immersed myself, started out in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, submission fighting, submission grappling, and just been, training ever since. I've trained, for a long time, with a lot of different masters, from Marcus Vinicius to Pat King, who's a black belt under Royce Gracie, to the great Ahmad Reese, who is known locally. He's been around the MMA underground scene in Los Angeles, who is a catch wrestler. and then I ended up making my way to the great Shanji Ibero, who's regarded as, if not the greatest BJJ practitioner of all time. So I'm currently a purple belt under Shanji Ibero, and I've kind of just dedicated myself to jiu-jitsu and the whole gentle art and that path and that lifestyle, and that's pretty much how I got started into it. And just kind of branched out, and just throughout the years, doors just started opening, and then, the guys down here at the Black House, maybe about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, just kind of opened their doors and embraced me, and I got that invitation, and it's just, a blessing, and I'm just happy to be here, and just glad to, all the different experiences that I got to experience over the last however many years since I started. Unfortunately, that's just, kind of how it is in the whole MMA culture. You can't really just get one thing, at one place. You got to kind of like branch out to really, my base, my foundation is jiu-jitsu, and the level is pretty high. So, in trying to get other aspects of my game in which I was deficient at, throughout the years, I had to completely immerse myself, in those specific arts and those specific disciplines, and kind of bring that level up to kind of parallel the jiu-jitsu. I didn't want to be just a one-dimensional fighter. I wanted to basically have all the various different skill sets necessary to be, a complete fighter. I'm still, far from where I want to be, but I'm not where I used to be either. So that in itself is a blessing. It's tough, throughout the years. It's definitely come with a lot of sacrifices. No partying, no girls. I've had, various different, situations throughout the years, romantically or whatnot. But, I've just, always just had blinders on, just determination, just straight ahead, just, tunnel vision that, in order for me to be successful at this and to really give it a go, I got to sacrifice a lot of things. And, I'm definitely, not unfamiliar with hard work and sacrifice and dedication. I come from very humble beginnings, coming from Philadelphia, a place like Philadelphia. It's a very economically depressed city. It's, a lot of ugly things that happen in that city. And, sometimes, people look back on their lives and they kind of wish that they've come from, a better economic situation or a family or born with a silver spoon in their mouth, so to speak. But, I'm thankful and blessed to have experienced all the various different experiences, that I've experienced or whatnot, the good, the bad, the indifferent, the ugly, and, it's kind of forged me into, who I am, and kind of, life is brazen me to be a certain way, to be tough, and then hopefully I can instill that, in which I'm trying to instill that into my boys as they grow older. But, it's definitely, a juggle, and it's come at a lot of sacrifice, and, just, I just stay focused on that, but, my boys have been around it, since they were very young, and they've loved it. They've wrestled since they were like 9 and 7 years old, and they dabbled in, jiu-jitsu, and, they're pretty, well known, and they've competed all over in tournaments and IBJJF tournaments and Abu Dhabi Pro Trials, and they've done a lot of great things within their short-lived, athletic careers so far. And they're boxing, and they're just kind of branching out and getting a taste of everything at a very young age. Fighting Andre Walker. I don't know too much about him. There's not too much online that I found out about him. I found out that he's from Club de Luciano. Club de Luciano in the area has always been regarded as, a great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach and technician himself, and also world champion Jiu-Jitsu player. Nothing but respect to Club de Luciano and to his camp. And again, I don't know too much about the guy. I know he's 2-0, indicated professionally, hasn't fought in a couple years. From what I heard, that he's a tough guy. He's very athletic. He's scrappy. So basically he just he's just a tough guy. He's real scrappy. That he's game, and I'm game as well. There's nothing that he can throw at me that life hasn't already thrown at me. And win, lose, or draw, it's going to be a war, and that's just from the military mindset that I have. We go into war, prepared to die. We went through that training. That's what we're trained for, and granted, whether it happens or not, but that's the mindset that I have. That I'm ready to go in that cage and I'm prepared to die. The difference is that the spotlight's on you now. The spotlight's on you, and everything that you've done and put into training and put into practice and that you've learned, you just got to translate that, and that's the whole goal, that it translate, and that you know, all the hard work is just going to show. And, you know, you put the work here, how you train is how you fight. You know, win, lose, or draw. You know, you go in there, you put on the showing, you know, you be the showman, you give the crowd what they want, because these guys, you know, the general public, they pay their hard-earned money. You know, especially in the economy that we have today, you know, they pay their hard-earned money, you know, just to come see us fight. And, you know, just without the fans, there's no us, you know what I mean? So, you know, go in there, put on a hell of a fight, and, you know, again, I'm game. I do a shout out to, you know, all my friends, you know, family, personal, and you know, extended family, personal, you know, immediate family, you know, my kids, you know, Fernando Jr., Jonathan, you know, everybody that has, you know, been influential in my life, currently, in the past, you know, they know who they are. You know, definitely, you know, I definitely want to send a special shout out to my first MMA coach, Coach Ahmad Reese. He was the guy who, like, really, you know, just kind of just opened my eyes to the whole MMA scene and kind of taught me everything, you know, really embraced me and treated me like, you know, a son, like a brother, like a people, and just really embraced me. And when there were times when I first started out, because we all know that starting out as a fighter, there's no glamour, it's not beautiful, you know, there's no riches or no pot of gold, you know, eventually, you know, starting out. But you know, even though there were times where I didn't have any money to pay for tuition or whatever, he just embraced me and just taught me, said, "Come on and come train."
It plays to his advantage, bro.
You know, right now he's kind of going through something to where, you know, he's, you know, having some, you know, current, you know, medical health issues. You know, hopefully, maybe, you know, eventually I would like to start, you know, a foundation or something eventually or whatever, but do more research and. You know, bring some awareness to his condition. It's called superficial sclerosis. It's where the brain, you know, leaves, you know, bleeding. When the brain bleeds, and it leaves iron deposits in the brain, and it kind of affects a lot of different motor skills and functions of the body. And then eventually, it just turns out to be, you know, a crazy, gnarly situation as you advance in age and you grow older. So definitely, I want to do, you know, to just know that, you know, I'm fighting for him and. You know, want him, you know, to make a full recovery and for him to get better, and then eventually, you know, from what I hear and from the research that I've done, it's an extremely rare disease. Like 1 out of every, you know, however many 100,000 people or whatever. It's just, you know, a rare disease. But, you know, I love that dude to death. He was a great man, great mentor, father figure, friend, coach, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Still very, you know, great friends with him to this day. Shout out to my boxing coach, Samuel Stewart. Over at Wildcard Boxing, Freddie Roach and all those guys over there, to my jiu-jitsu professor, the great Sean Giabera, you know, to Patrick King, Voice Grace Jiu-Jitsu, Pat King Jiu-Jitsu, just, you know, the Body Shop, Antonio McKee, all those guys that I've worked with throughout the years, and, you know, Savant Young Fight Academy, Pasadena, just everybody and anybody who's had a hand in my development throughout the years. Just thank you, and you know who you are, you know what you guys mean to me, and if you don't know, I'm just letting you know you guys just mean everything to me. I love all you guys individually, you know, and you know, we're just gonna go out there and put on a show, and definitely, you know, last but not least, but thanks to the Black House, my fellow, you know, brothers and sisters here who, you know, come here and, you know, they help me get ready. They kick my ass on a daily basis, and, you know, iron sharpens iron. And, you know, shout outs to Austin Uku, who's a great strength and conditioning coach, Clarence Cheney, you know, just everybody, you know, Kevin Casey, Marcio Liotos, Lou Pauli's, you know, everybody here that's at the Black House. Just, you know, again, you know, I wish I had like flashcards in front of me to like really, you know, give justice, you know, really good, you know, shout outs to everybody that really deserves it. But, you know, everybody, you know, that whoever's had a hand in my development throughout the years, past, present, even future, whatnot, you know who you are. You're in my heart, and I love you all. And I think, you know, words can't be described, you know, my appreciation and my gratitude for everything that you've done for me. All right, to everybody out there, Los Angeles area, to all my peoples back in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, all my peoples in New York, in Puerto Rico, you know, come holler at your boy, come see me, Badbeat 15, April 10th, you know, come watch your boy, the Philadelphia Badass, Fernando Smith, you know, LEI, you know, so come see me.